Great to have everyone here this evening, and thank you for coming along. What a wonderful place it is to come down to Napier, Hastings, and even to the Bay, where apparently they say there's more sun that shines here than any other place in the country. Is that right? Well, that's what they say here. If you go to Tauranga, they say it's there. If you go to Nelson, it says there as well. But it's just great coming to this part of the country, and we've got some good friends, and just want to say thank you, Marlene. What a wonderful way that you've spoken into us about the things that are really important as well. And so we've built some really great relationships with the people that are here as well. So it's an honour to be here for both my beautiful wife Moka and I to be here as well, and especially in the last 2.5 years. So yeah. I have to say, I don't get that, because when I introduce my wife, she always gets the clap, right? And so I imagine it's a woman. I know the woman, they all clapped, right? But it's great. And so our journey, we've been married for nearly 38 years. We have 4 children and 2 grandchildren, 3 boys and 1 daughter, and they're all adult children as well. And so that's our family, that's our whānau. That's what we've journeyed through as well. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to have the value of family in the things that we do. And so this evening, I just want to share a little bit about our story, how we got to be where we are here now. And my background is that my parents came from the beautiful Cook Islands. I don't know if there's any cookies in the audience here. It's great, right? We've got some cookies in the audience. We call them cookies, right? Because they come from the Cook Islands. And that's why we always call ourselves smart cookies, right? That's who we are. And so my parents came from the Cook Islands, but I'm one of the first generation born here in New Zealand. And my grandmother is half Jewish, so her name is called Rita Goldstein. And so you can't get any more Jewish than that. And so we had this interesting journey that we grew up in Ponsonby in the year of 1966. I'm unashamed to sort of say that's my age as well. I don't know if there's any 66s out there. 1966. Okay, that's all right. I know people don't want to give their age away, but that's who it was. So, and when I was born in there, I remember that we went home, and our house was 142 John Street in Ponsonby. There was a time when a lot of the Pacifica were migrating through into the First World War, and there was a labour shortage, and so there was an open door for Pacifica people to come and to be working in, whether it was in the factories and merchandising, retail, hospitality, and that's where my parents came, and I was there. And I remember that when we were there, it was an incredible time because we didn't have much, but we always felt like there was some optimism about what we were doing. I remember my parents telling me that when I was born, one of the things that they did was that actually they took my afterbirth, we call it a pito, and then they dug a hole and they put it into the ground. And then they buried it over, and then they planted a tree. I asked my parents, I said, so what was the importance of that, the symbolism of that? And they said it's a cultural way of saying that now that, when your afterbirth goes into the land, means that you're part of the land and you're part of the people. Amen. And so it was just this simple thing, but it was a symbolism that I grew up with, always knowing that I was part of the land and part of the people. And I'd never lost that. And so that was one thing that was part of our journey. And I remember that we had a very humble place, and so it was a 3-bedroom house. My uncles and aunties were there. There were about 12 of us in the house. It had match lining, so those of you who come from a construction background, it had a 3.2 metre stud, no insulation, so it was cold. We had the old sort of pull cord lights that you used to have to turn the light on, outside toilet, and no running hot water. We had to boil the water outside to come in. But the amazing thing is, we never ever felt poor. My dad was labouring, my mum was cleaning. They had 2 jobs that they were cleaning us along the journey as well. And I remember one day when my mum was actually cleaning at the chief post office in town, which is where Britta Mart is now, and then she'd come up to K Road and she'd clean there. And me and my older brother, we would have to walk from John Street all the way up there, and then we would come in through the back door and we'd help mum clean. And because that's what you did. And I remember one day, and I was only 5 years old, and then I was cleaning, and then I sort of, as you do, I lifted up the carpet and I swept the rubbish into the carpet and put it down there. Anyway, my mum came along and she saw the lump. I mean, I don't know how silly. I thought that no one could see it, right? There was this lump with all this rubbish. So my mum lifted it up and she said to me, she told me off. And she said, you have to learn is that it doesn't matter that today you may be the cleaner, tomorrow you could be the person in charge. But whatever you do, always do your best. Always give your best. Honour and respect the places and the people that are part of this place. And so those are just some of the values that I grew up as a young person and so forth. Then went to West Auckland, trained as an electrician, was a contractor, and then from there we got married, my wife and I. Funny story, she actually proposed to me. I know, it's true. And so I said to her, hey, you got this wrong. You can't. She said, well, do you have feelings for me? And I said, yes. Then why don't you just marry me? And I said, hey, I'm meant to ask you. And she said, what, does the Bible say that only men can ask, a person to marry? Anyway, long story short, we got married and we went to Bible college and did a theological degree. We spent 20 years in ministry and working in community. And throughout that time, our calling was from Isaiah 58. It's about helping, supporting people in our community. And so that was our calling. And we had a small community church. Mock is a counsellor, family therapist, and a child psychotherapist. So I've had 38 years of counselling, right the way through. And so that's why emotionally I'm very strong, very, very strong, right? But our heart was always for the people. And then the door opened up for us to go into Parliament. And to be honest, we had no ambition, no desire. And I remember this opportunity where I had a chance to speak into a meeting that was there, and I challenged the political leaders of the day. I said, I don't see a vision, and I don't hear a vision, I don't hear the values that drive that. And I said, and it's uninspiring. John Key was the Prime Minister at that time, came to me and said to me, you need to be in Parliament. So long story short, I went from literally 2 months of having no connection, no political party involvement or anything, and in 2011, I was in Parliament. And I thought, wow, there I am, I'm in Parliament. And I'm thinking why am I here? And then I knew that I had to go back, and I felt in my heart to actually become an apprentice in Parliament. And so when people said to me, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to sweep the floors and make the cup of teas. And I said, why would you do that? Because that's what I did when I was an apprentice. And it's like I felt that I need to have a heart of serving, and as I did that, I would look and I would learn. The amazing thing has happened is that as I started to have that attitude, I got a call from John Key, who was the Prime Minister, and said to me, Alfred, we've chosen you, of all the MPs inside Parliament, to have what they call the address and reply, the very first speech of Parliament. They only choose one person. And I thought, wow, so you get to speak from your heart, whatever it is on your heart. And so when I began to speak at that time, I started writing the speech out, and I began to talk about honouring my mum and my dad, where we've come from, our humble beginnings. I also acknowledged my faith that was critical to who I am, but also talked about the future. And remember, there was one time in my speech that I quoted Dame Whina Cooper, where she said this. She said, Māori, you get hoha, you get angry, when there's conversations in the room, you stamp your fist on the table and you walk out. And when you walk out, they make decisions for you. And she simply said this, stay in the room. Stay in the room. And I realized that there's a learning that sometimes you have to be in the room, even as hard and as difficult it is, you have to stay in the room. And so what happened for me over that period of time, what I found was that actually doors were opening up to me. And I had a chance to go into Bill English's office as the Minister of Finance. I began to serve other people that were around there. And then I won the favour of not only the ministers and the people in the party, but then I became a cabinet minister under the leadership of the Prime Minister at that time, Bill English. And it was such a wonderful thing to be able to look and to learn, and a privilege to be in that place. So I learned about the systems of Parliament, the laws, how we govern, how we actually have financial responsibility. And at the end of that time, as you'll know, in 2017, all the things changed. We went out of government and then we were in opposition. And it was at that time where we began to sort of say, to Mocha and I just prayed and said, Lord, should we stay or should we go? And what turned it for us was the fact is that when Mocha then said to me, no, I think we should pray. And when the name of Jesus were taken out of the parliamentary prayer, it's like things then changed. And then I remember that time, there was only a few Christians that came out to begin to say that that's wrong. And then they asked, would there any MP that would come out? And out of only the 120, I was the only one that went out. And Mocha was saying to me, you need to come out. So I came out and I stood up. And when I said that it was wrong what the speaker did to take the name of Jesus came out, then the power of the Holy Spirit came upon me and spoke to me. I've chosen you for such a time as this, to hold the name of Jesus as a banner for the nation and to be a watchman on the tower. And then all of a sudden it began to change. And so then for what I realized is that here's what a watchman needs to do. You need to understand the tower that you're in. So I began to study and understand all the history and the heritage of Parliament, all the way back to 1854. And here's what I found. The first debate in Parliament was actually about prayer. When an MP called McAndrew from Christchurch turned around and said, point of order, Mr. Speaker, before we debate, deliberate and decide the affairs of this nation, we need divine guidance. So Catholics and Protestants argued, because that's what they do, for 2 hours. And then they came up with this prayer that said this, putting all personal and private interests aside, we beseech thee, in other words, that old English word, which is that we cry out to you, that you would give us divine guidance, that we would conduct the affairs of this house for the nation, for the welfare, prosperity, and peace of its people. We honour the Queen, and we pray this in Jesus' name, amen. And that prayer lasted for 165 years. It was like an anchor stone that was there. And I began to realise that God gave me the statement, the footprint of faith is deep and wide in this land. Why do I feel like I'm telling you this? Because people turn around would say this, that religion and church is separate from the state and from government. Now, I agree they're two separate institutions, but the truth is, actually one needs the other. The role of a Christian faith is to be the conscience of a nation, to remind the leaders of the nation in the governance role about its roles of responsibility, to conduct its affairs. Remember the prayer? For the peace and prosperity of the nation. And when it's not doing that, then it needs to rise to its feet, declare with its voice, to remind the government of the day, those in places of influence, to uphold those very values. That's what it's meant to remember. And I remember that in that time I began to speak out and we began to pray and intercede. And as we walked around Parliament, God began to give more revelation. And at the end of that year in 2018, outside Parliament, we went from 200 at the beginning to 2,000 standing outside. And it was at that point where I came forward and God gave me these words to say, the footprint of faith is deep and wide in this land. And I could see that the impressions that were there were so important to those of faith, not so that we could turn around and condemn, judge others, but to remind us that, you know, this Christian faith, it's a foundation stone. It's a foundation stone. And so I began to declare and talk about this. When Henry Williams was translating the Treaty of Waitangi, in his diaries, here's what he got to in the middle of the night, because he only had 24 hours to translate. He prayed the prayer, and God gave him this, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14 to 18. The dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile was brought down but by the cross of Christ, so that they would become one new man. And he introduced a new word called kawanata, which means covenant. So it could be a covenant relationship. When I became the Minister of Community and Voluntary Sector, here's what I found out. 80% of our voluntary services come from a faith-based foundation. I remember speaking to government officials and they'd say to me, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting figure. Why do you think that is? So we've got who? Salvation Army, Presbyterian Support Services, Methodist Mission, Habitat for Humanity, Barnardo's, SPCA, believe it or not, came from William Wilberforce for the care of animals. Wow. And then people said, these officials, who didn't have faith, they said to me, why do you think that is? I said, it's really simple. Because here's what we know with people of faith, of Christian faith. Two things. Love God, love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. And the reasons I kept on saying that is that here I was in a national party, there was a political party, but I could be unashamed of my Christian values. Unashamed about the things that I said, and I expressed them in ways that I believe could make a difference, and standing up for them. But you see, the tale of the story was that became awkward and it became uncomfortable for a number of people. And in the end of the election of 2020, I was one of 22 national MPs that basically walked out of Parliament. Why? Because the country voted for one party to rule over the last 3 years that we've had. That's the reality of our story. I know there's a lot of people that say, we don't like what we've seen, they shouldn't do what they're doing. But the truth is, this country of Aotearoa New Zealand voted 51% of the party vote for that one party, for the Labour Party to rule the nation. So whether we love it, like it, or hate it, it is our reality. And inside of that, we have to take some responsibility for that. And so where does the responsibility lie now? It lies in you and I making a decision about the future of our nation and how that needs to shift and change. And so out of that journey, we came out, Moka and I, and we said, okay, we'll go off and do some other things. And it was a great time to be able to spend time with our family and so forth. But I lost my older brother during that COVID period of time. And so we went through the hardship that many people did in losing loved ones through that time and not being able to grieve, even to be able to mourn their loss because of the COVID conditions. So we were part of what was happening in our nation. And as we sat and as we began to go about the affairs of looking after our family, we began to see a nation begin to groan. We began to see people being concerned. And then it became afraid, and fear turned into anger as freedoms were being removed. And it came to that point where, and it's only just not so long ago, about 12 or 14 weeks ago, where we felt the call in our heart to return back in to this place called politics and Parliament. And I remember that when it happened, it was like, wow, are we going to do this? And we said, yes, we are going to do this. We're going to step in. And I remember that what had happened, I felt there was a sense of saying, let it go, let it go. And I knew what it was. I'd made a vow at the end of my 9 years, my last day in Parliament, I made this vow, I never want to go back to this place again. I never want to go back. It's cost me and my family too much. It's a challenging, difficult place to be in. And I made that vow, and I felt that in my heart that God was saying, now let it go. So I said, okay, Father, I surrender it to you. And as soon as I did that, what I got from him was his love for this nation and for its people. That's what now sits in my heart. The love for this nation and for its people. And I'm going to tell you this, it's unshakable. It's unmovable. Because I know what this love is. It's a love that's so deep and so wide because it doesn't come from me, but it comes from a well that is so deep. And so therefore, here's what's happening. I'm running at the giant. I'm running at the mountain. Why? Because I know that this nation needs truth as well as grace. People are crying out for hope. And so that's the reasons why we're coming back into this place. Even at the cost where even our children say, Dad, why would you want to take us into the space of public ridicule, harm, and even condemnation and judgment? Surely God can choose someone else's parents. We've been PKs, pastors' kids, politicians' kids. Haven't we done enough tours of duty? Surely. And we wept with our children because we know the cost of what it means to step into the space. But one by one, they came back and they said, Mum and Dad, you've loved us even in days when you didn't agree with the decisions that we made and you still stood by us. So now we will stand with you. So I stand before you today with the love of my wife, with the care and support of my children to stand for this nation, to stand for its people. And as we stand, we want to also encourage you to stand as well. And so then all of a sudden we said, we're 105 days out. I mean, seriously, what are we going to do with 105 days out? It's like the impossible. And so then this name, NewZeal, came. I love the word zeal because zeal actually means energy in pursuit of a cause. That's what zeal means. And we just realized that there's an energy, a new energy that now needs to pursue the things that are right for this nation. It's no longer about the left of politics or the right of politics. It's about doing the right thing, the good thing for this country and for this nation. And so we had this name called NewZeal. And we had the sense of a calling that could a nation be born in one day? And the answer is yes, it can be. And so then we said, well, what do we do? We had a man that came along and he said, look, I really feel that I've been on my back for 3 years. I've been sick and unwell, and I prayed a prayer every morning is that, God, we need something new. We need something new in this nation. He found himself in front of us. He said, tell me what you're doing. So we told him. And then he said, leave it with me. And one day he came back with this. He said, we're working together for the good of this country. And I love that word good because it has power to it. And then he said, this is the image. Because why? This nation is made of people. In Māoridom, they say tangata whenua, tangata meaning people, whenua meaning land. It's the land of the people. And the working together is working together, not dividing a nation, so that Māori and Pākehā can stand together in unity. That Pacifica and Asian can stand together in unity. That Croatian, I love the Croatians in our community, West Auckland, can stand together with Russians and others. Where actually we can, where it's the north and the south, rural and even towns, regional, can stand together as one community, as one country. This is what we are doing. We have to work together, not divide each other. And so this is the vision that we believe that's been given to us, working together for the good of this country. So we started putting together some priority areas, policies that have our values inside of it. I'm going to run through 5 of them, and then I'm going to open the floor for you to ask some questions so that we can cover that. Here's the first thing. Families, whānau, are the foundation of our nation. Everyone turns around. If you look at different policies, everyone says that, yeah, families are foundation, families are important. But here's what they don't talk about. You talk to them about how are you going to do that? How are you going to make them? Anyone can say it. Good intentions are not good enough. You have to ask the question, how are you going to do that? Does anyone want to ask me how I'm going to do that? Yeah, how are you going to do it? Hey, what a great question. Here's what I learned when I was in Parliament as a cabinet minister. They have a thing in policy called the paramountcy clause. In other words, the first centre thing that you build a policy around that leads into practice. And so what I saw there is that families are not the paramountcy of a lot of the policies that we have. Here's what we have. We have the child that's there. And everyone says, oh, that's great. We've got the child that's the centre, and now families are at the side. There is one part, which is called whānau order, by the way, that puts whānau at the centre. But a majority of our policies are not like that. And so the child is at the centre, parents on the side, family on the side, and everyone says, oh, that's okay. That seems normal. But here's the other problem. Then you've got Ministry of Health, then you've got Ministry of Education, then all of a sudden, guess what happens? The family, the other ministries, health and education and others, are just as important as the family. People say, that's okay, that seems normal. But here's what happens now. Follow the line of what actually happens. So a year and a half ago, do you remember during the COVID vaccinations? Ministry of Health says this, my gosh, we need to look after the welfare of the child. They need to be vaccinated. Speaks to the Ministry of Education. You need to look after the health and well-being of the child. They need to be vaccinated. They go straight to the child and say this, you know what? Even as young as 12, you do not need the consent of your parents. You can be vaccinated. So what happened there? We don't need the consent many times of the parents. It goes even further. There's already a law that's inside Parliament called the Conversion Practices Prohibition Law. And one part of that law says this, is that inside that even a child as young as 12 does not need parental consent to have a transition of one gender to the next. As young as 12. Why? Because we've taken away the parents as the centre policy, the paramountcy clause. That's what you have to do. So from then on, here's what happens. If you want to talk about vaccination, oh my gosh, you have to talk to the parent. If you want to talk about education and teaching them anything from sexuality and so forth, you have to talk to the parent. Why? Because they're part of the family. That's how you change this. That's how you make sure that our family and our whānau is at the centre of what we do. Farmers. Do we have any farmers here? We've got farmers, we've got orchardists, we've got, I just love the fact is that, when I remember I went down with the groundswell, they had the motorcade, and I jumped on my, humble Dodge Ram twin cab V8 ute. And I went along, and then we drove for about 2.5 hours, and then we went down Queen Street, and I remember that I got interviewed, and they said, Alfred, why are you doing this? Why are you supporting the farmers? I said, it's pretty simple. They've been feeding our whānau and our family for generations. Why? Oh, yeah, why wouldn't we? Stop beating down on the farmers. When I first went in Parliament in 2011 and 2012, the next year, I engaged in what they call the Parliamentary Business Trust. And that gives an opportunity for MPs to go into different corporates. First place I went to was Fonterra. I started off in Queen Street, seeing how that on the stock exchange and the markets, how we were trading all our products and in the dairy industry. And then I ended up down in Palmerston North, where I milked my first cow. I know. The old city boy milked his first cow, and I survived. 6 cows. Somewhere someone drank the milk from those 6 cows. It was amazing. But here's what happened for me. I gained a huge amount of respect for our farmers, who work incredibly hard. I found out that they are the most emission-efficient food producers in the world. But why is it that we've now got an ideology that wants to beat down and make the burden of blame, because this is what we've created, a blame culture. And you know what people are doing? Blame it on the farmers. And we've created a culture where now we've got a generation that are being fed a diet to believe the fact is that when it comes to the climate, when it comes to the environment, here's what we need to do, blame it on the farmers. And yet none of them have actually been on the land. Because if you have, you'll understand this. Farmers work to the conditions of the environment. There's a good reason, because it's bigger than them. It does things that they can't control. So you work to that environment, even as difficult as it may be. You have to work with your livestock on the land. You look after them, you care for them. Why? Because you get the productivity out of that, because that's what you do. But a lot of people don't realise that. And here's what happens. We had 14,000 students march on Parliament about climate change. And here's what they said. You know, you baby boomers, you are the burden to blame for the cause of our future. And we had parties celebrating that. Said, isn't this amazing that our young people, and here's the crazy thing is, none of them got challenged for basically wagging school. Oh no, wagging's an old school word. What do they call it now? Truant, is it? Truancy? Yeah. Wagging? Can I use wagging? Is that? Yeah. Those of you that are laughing because you wagged school, eh? I know you did. That's how you knew. You got in trouble and you probably got caned for it or smacked. I don't know. Back in the day when you could do that, right? That's another story. We're not going into there. But here's the thing, right? They become the burden of blame. Why are we doing that? And this is what happens. So this policy here was not designed by me because I am not a farmer. But we sat with the farmers and we said to them, if we could change things, if we could do something different to what any other party is doing, what would it be? He said, start by looking at the areas of compliance. Start by making sure we're not going to have more new taxes around emissions and our carbon sinks that we're putting upon our farmers. You know, I went and met the farmers from up in South Kaipara here, the Hyam family. They got 3,000 acres. They employ one full-time person just for compliance alone. But here's what she said. They've come from generations of farmers, right? And she doesn't mind me using her name. She said, use my name. Her name is called Janet Hyam. She turned around and said, with tears in her eyes, she said, Alfred, I never thought I'd be in this country, this lovely country that I grew up, that I've been generations in, where people will see us as farmers as scum. That's the words that she used. They see us as scum. And she began to weep at that. She said, why? Why is it this is happening? Why? Because we've got people with an ideology who are trying to put the burden of blame upon our farmers. And so we've made sure that we've talked with them is that under NewZeal, we'll not only advocate for you, but we'll work with you. I mean, the amount of research that's been going on for them to be able to do the right thing, and people take 2 bad apples and then all of a sudden think like, right, everything else there, sorry, talking about apples, but they take 2 and they think that like everything else needs to shift and change. No, it's not. And so our farmers are critically important to us as well. Teaching and education. Any teachers in the room? Yes, great. We love our teachers. And here's what the teachers and the educators are telling us. At the moment, they use a funny word called squish. I don't know how you say that, but they said, in other words, they feel like they're being pressured into doing more than what they're able to do. And they said that if we could need some help, we don't need to rewrite the curriculum, by the way, because there are political parties saying, let's rewrite the whole curriculum. We've got an amazing curriculum, right? It's world leading. It's innovative, creative. There's some changes that need to be made. They said, yes, but let's work at things like, for instance, professional development and releasing some of that pressure around extracurricular activities. Here's another person who was helping writing, I think, with Mary Chamberlain, his name, around the Tomorrow Schools curriculum and the current curriculum. And he said this, how about we actually go back to PAFT, parents as first teachers, support families when they're in their home with their children. Just simple things. It's not rocket science, but if we could do that, that'll be important. How about we engage with parents so they're part of the learning journey inside the children's journey in schools? So we talk with them, ask them about curriculum and other areas that they can be supportive and helpful for. How about we do those things that really make a difference? And here's the other bit that I believe that's really important, is that innovation is such a key inside our education, especially as we're heading up to the compulsory sector, years 11 to 13 and even beyond. And we talk about innovation because it's a Kiwi DNA. And I love that because not everybody will go into other tertiary studies, but like myself, I went into a trade as an electrician. Other people will do that. And isn't it amazing? I started off as an electrician and look where I am now. Because where you start is not always where you end, but the starting point is important to what we're doing. And I love the fact is that inside this learning journey, we're empowering excellence while at the same time to finding innovation for the future as well. Just two more. Championing, champions of freedom, we hear you. You know, there's a lot at the moment that people are actually beating the drum because our freedoms have been taken away from us. Absolutely. You know, every year we stand and we go to the Anzac Parade, we stand in the cold, waiting for the rising of the sun, and then we recite the ode. They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. The years shall not weary them, nor the ages condemn them, and at the rising of the sun we shall remember them. We say that. And we say it because we honour those who've gone, who fought and struggled and even died for our freedoms. But all of a sudden, someone took a tragedy like the mosque attack, and then the Prime Minister of the day said, you know what, it's because people were sort of having hate in their speeches and so forth. All of a sudden we had disinformation projects that were going in our universities. It started to shift and change things from where we were, and we realised that all of a sudden our freedoms were being taken away. Can I say to you, conversion practices prohibition have challenged you? Are there any pastors in the house? Yes? Okay. Did you know that bill actually challenges the way you preach and the way you pray? That's in there. People say, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. If you read inside the clause, in fact, you can go in further, and this is what people won't tell you, but here's what I learned in the system. When you put a piece of law in place, as a lawmaker, they have a thing called the Regulatory Impact Statement. It's called the RIS. Inside that statement, it's where government officials or a department will write a report and will tell you, are there any unintended consequences that could come out of this law? Page 22 of the Regulatory Impact Statement says this: there will be unintended consequences to those who are in places of faith and religion where the courts will have to determine a complaint through the Human Rights Commission. So here's what they're saying: don't do it. There'll be unintended consequences. And when the Minister of Justice at that time, Chris Farfoy, was asked the question by the media, so, Minister Farfoy, if a preacher or a person in a mosque or any other religion turns around and says something and there's an offence held by that person, could they go to court? And he said, oh no, it'll never happen, the bar is too high. But the question was, could it happen? The answer is yes. Because once you provide a legal pathway, it can and will happen eventually. So why would you do that? I tell you why. Because people are trying to control the freedoms in our nation. But can I say this to you? Don't let this be our fear, and don't let it be the chicken that we chase. Because at the moment, while it's important, let's not get caught up in being the thing that all of a sudden we're going to build a vision for the future. You do not build a vision of hope on fear. But you have to address this. And so as a party of NewZeal, we want to make sure there is a freedom of speech. But always remember, with rights, there are also responsibilities. No one's talking about that. And so we have a line already in the law that if you go over that responsibility, in other words, if I was to stand up here having the freedom to speak, and I turned around and started to incite violence against others, now I've gone over my responsibility. There's a law that actually holds me to account if I say that. So we should have the freedom of speech, the freedom to hold a belief, and the freedom to even have an opinion. We've got cancel culture all over this place, even for people who are afraid to even speak. Even when they see that something's wrong, people are afraid to speak out against it. Last one I want to talk about is around business and finance, because this is critically important. And when I was inside the Minister of Finance's office in Bill English, here's what I learnt from him and those around him, is that financial responsibility or fiscal responsibility is not just about money, it's about attitude and behaviour. It's about those in positions of responsibility. Here's what they need to be reminded of, and we don't use this term enough. We call it the public purse. And the reasons why it's called the public purse is it doesn't matter whether you're the cleaner, the farmer, the business owner, you pay taxes into a system and it's called the public purse. So when you're making decisions, this is not money that just sort of came out of nowhere. This is money that's given with a responsibility to care for the people and for this nation. So when people are making these decisions, they have to be absolutely conscious of what they are doing. So for us here in NewZeal, we believe that we need to have fiscal and financial responsibility. We need to make sure that we understand this is the public purse. Here's the other thing that people don't talk about, and that the backbone of our economy is our small to medium enterprises. I don't know if there's anyone here who owns a small business. Is anyone who owns a small business? Great. So you'll understand the fact is that your business, right? Actually, I don't know if anyone has told you, did you know that you guys are the backbone of our economy? Has anyone ever told you that? You're the backbone of our economy. You make up over 550,000 small to medium enterprises in our country. It's not the big corporates, they have an important role, but actually it's you, the small businesses. And I remember that when I was in there as a minister, one of the things that we needed to do was that we were never giving enough support to our SMEs. So here's the thing that we've talked about. We want to talk about provisional tax in the first 2 years. We want to talk about the back of office support that's there, whether it be around finances and accounting, whether it be about what's called legal, and even around HR that are critically important, because this is what they are saying to us. And so this is really important, because when we can allow them to thrive and grow, my goodness, can they grow? And here's the other thing that I found out. When I was the Minister of Pacific Peoples, I went straight to MB. Why? Because what I realised, there was not enough opportunity for Māori, Pacific and others to go into business. And if we're going to shift the dynamics of our communities, let's open up the opportunities for those communities to start up their own businesses and begin to thrive, to innovate. And I love that when we went to Wairoa with Waipatu and that, you know, and here's what they said, no one comes to Wairoa. We went to Wairoa. And then when I was asked about a question from the floor, they said, someone may be taking our bus away. And he said, what do you have to say about that? I said, go and buy your own bus. Go and set up your own bus company. And they laughed. And they said, you know why we're laughing? Because right next door is the old Wairoa bus company. And there are some buses somewhere in the community just sitting there. Why am I saying that? Because sometimes we've gotten into a culture and into a habit where we keep doing things for people rather than doing them with them. Why can't Wairoa have its own bus company where locals could begin to thrive? And here's what I learned when I was in Israel, a small country similar to New Zealand. You know their key to their success is called innovation. Having innovation hubs. And so small communities around a country can innovate and they can begin to thrive. You know, New Zealand, our backbone and our DNA is that we came here as pioneers, risk takers and innovators. Here's what we do. We climb mountains and we split atoms. That's who we are. Why is it that we can't thrive? And I just believe it's so important. We need to invest in that in what we're doing as well. So one of the questions that people ask me is that what's the difference between you and all the other minor parties? And I respect anyone who puts their hand up to be able to enter into politics and even to be elected. But since people ask me what my point of difference is, it's what I've been telling you for the last 25 minutes. I've been in Parliament for 9 years. I know how the system works. I know what it means to be a lawmaker. I've been a cabinet minister. I know that how you can turn legislation into policy and into practice that makes a difference in our community. I've been through that process as well. That's my point of difference. I go in further to let people know that actually in the history of MMP in New Zealand, there's never been any political minor party that's got in without either a former or current member of parliament. And people say, well, why is that? It's because people will vote for competence. They'll vote for someone that they know they can go in and do the job. You know, that's quite simple. So, with 105 days to go, and by the way, we're now at day 40, guess what happened? We said, we got no campaign runway. And so we turned around, we talked, we prayed, we thought, and he said, you know what? A campaign runway is what you would do. And I remember that when I was with the National Party, we'd start off at 12 months, right? And then you release one policy, then you release another policy, then you go out. And now at the moment, people are campaigning. They're going out and cutting ribbons and kissing your babies and shaking your hands and telling you about what they're going to do for you and for this and so forth. And so that's what they do leading up to the election. We don't have that. So guess what we said? We're going to shoot a rocket. That's our campaign strategy. We're just going to go up. And isn't it amazing? It changed the attitude. Because now we're not trying to sort of go this way. We're just going to go up. And so what does that mean? Let's come up with rocket strategies. And so here was one of the first rocket strategies. Every political party does a flyer. They call it a DLE. We're writing a book. It's a simple book, but it's a powerful book. We've had people come along and say that when you compare this to all the other flyers that are there, they say, wow, isn't this amazing? And do you like the colours? Yes. The colours pop. They do. And the most important thing, they're colours that actually women like. And I'll tell you why that makes a difference. When I was with the National Party, we struggled to find colours. Did you notice that some political parties use pink? Because they think like, oh, that's what women will like. And I think, wow. I've talked to a lot of other women. We haven't said, no, not really. Not necessarily. But when there's a colour that has a meaning to it, and what I love about this, if you Google and you say, Google colour of zeal, do you know what it comes up with? This colour. It's called Pacific Jade. And so the colour, the feel, the book, the priorities, we put them all in there. And what we found is this. People are more likely to pick up a book than they are to read a flyer. Go figure. But it happens. And along with that, we've also too got a team of young people that are also too getting us into social media, right? Because you have to. We have to get that message out here. It's a rocket strategy. And so we've got social media and so forth. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and a whole lot of other things. And I remember my young son rang me up and said, Dad, my friend rang me and said, your dad's on TikTok. And I said, he said, what? Please tell me my dad wasn't dancing on TikTok. And he goes, no, he wasn't. What was he doing? He said that he's a leader of this NewZeal Party. And he goes, and what did you do? And he said, check it out. So I checked it out on the website. And I joined. He's 23 years old, Dad, and he joined a party. Never joined any political party. So he said to him, why did you join? Because it seemed cool. It seemed right. And then he said, and then I invited my family. And what happened? And they joined. You know, all we know is that we're just going to shoot this rocket. We're going to reach out in many different ways that we believe are important. But here's the thing that's really interesting, right? Did you know that, and I learned this when I was in the Justice and Electoral Select Committee, this experience that I had, that we review every single election. Every election that we've had in this country, especially over the last 20 to 30 years, there's been on average 600 to 700,000 people who don't vote. They're enrolled, registered, but they just don't vote. So there's a massive pool out there waiting for people. We just got, someone today actually sent me a message and showed that someone had done the stats. I'm trying to find out what it is, but it said that actually there are about 240,000 Christians in churches who don't vote. Crazy. So what we're doing is that we're out there. We're shooting this rocket. We're getting around the country. And then we're getting a bit of fuel, because you need a bit of fuel to fuel up the rocket, and it's shooting up. And we're out, and we're going all around the country to meet wonderful people like yourself, to tell us, to tell you about the things that we believe that we're called to, about the messages that we're giving as well, and telling you people about this NewZeal as well. So ladies and gentlemen, now's your chance to ask me anything, right? Anything that you would like to ask, and then let's see how we go. Yes, question from the back.
Congratulations on a great set of policies. From the outside, you've been in Parliament, but from the outside, a lot of these policies are just evil. For example, they want to get 12-year-olds to be able to consent to vaccinations and consent to sex change, and they really want to go further and have them consent to sex acts and legalise paedophilia. Taking away freedom of speech, all the climate policies, they're affecting Australia, Canada, Western European countries, and so from the outside, it looks like these are all coming from globalist organisations like World Economic Forum and UN and the WHO. Would you have a policy for dealing with those organisations as part of the government?
Yes, what you're saying is right. I mean, I've been over in Geneva. I've actually seen them. I was on a number of different committees called the IPCU. So we looked into what the United Nations were putting through, World Health Organization as well. Never went to the World Economic Forum, and has a different sort of trajectory and where it affects different elements of this. But here's the thing that I would say, is that first of all, we need to reassert our sovereignty as a nation. Yeah. Right? That's really important. We don't have to sign up to everything and anything that's there. And even though we're a small island nation, right, and we have to be trading, right, we've already got relationships that are really important. So at the moment, the reasons that we're struggling is called all of our eggs as far as our trade is in one particular basket called China. Now, when I was with National and I was a cabinet minister, we had a thing called the TPP, which is called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that was to diversify our trade portfolio. You know, the amazing thing is that the Labour opposition at that time, they marched on the streets. They said, you're taking our sovereignty, this is evil and this is wrong. When they got into government, here's what they did. That document was 800 pages long. They added 3 pages and then they call it the CPTPP and made it sound like it was okay. So, in answering your question, I believe it's important. First of all, we need to have these relationships because as a small island nation, we need those particular relationships as far as our diplomatic affairs and our foreign affairs. But we don't have to sign up to some of the things that I believe are not right for us. So let's take, for instance, where the climate change. We signed in 2015 the Paris Accord, which then became the Kyoto Agreement. Out of that, they have a thing called SDGs, which is called Sustainable Development Goals. Now, all of a sudden, we're burdening ourselves with things we don't need to be burdened with. We have 80% renewable energy in New Zealand. Why then are we trying to get to 100%? We shouldn't, and we can't. You know, we have the most emission-efficient farming in the world. Why are we all of a sudden trying to change and burden ourselves? We make only 0.2% of carbon emissions in the world. And now all of a sudden we're trying to say that, no, we've got to do our part. We're already doing our part. And so to me, that's what I believe is important. So for NewZeal, we see ourselves as a coalition partner to hold the bigger parties to account. To say that let's go back to some common sense and let's stop making this burden of blame upon all the people that are around there. And you are right. One of the things that I think is important is that people bandy all of these bits out and then they call it, everyone likes to call it, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. If you were to stand up in a public meeting, oh, it is a public meeting, but if you were to stand up and they heard you say what you said, you know what they said? Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. Now, the thing is, I'd say to you, there is truth in what you're saying, but don't chase the chicken down the rabbit hole. In other words, stay the course. Do you know what our course is? We need to change the government where it is at the moment. We need to have a minority party there to hold it to account. So you know what our course is? Chase this chicken. Put our effort into here and vote, party vote for NewZeal so that we can become the party that holds the bigger government to account.
You just put your hand up, I'll bring the...
how can you work together with the other minor parties to become more powerful and unify that common cause, it seems, that runs through the majority of those minor parties that are on the side of freedom, and they recognise some of these big key issues that are going on?
That's a really good question, and everywhere I go, everyone asks the same question, because at the moment there are about 20 minor parties that are all in that space, all trying to do the same thing with each other. So just to let you know that I've had lots of conversations with a number of them to talk about, is it possible to be able to work together? Now, in those conversations, we all want unity, but then there comes to a point that there may be some things we have in common, but there are other things that we don't. So I respect, and I said to them, well, let's still be respectful of each other, but at the moment trying to come together actually can be difficult. Then other people turn around and say this, let's come under an umbrella, and it doesn't matter, we'll just get ourselves in and then we'll just go off and do what we need to do, as long as we get in to make the change. So here's the experience that I've learned in talking to other parties where this has impacted them. You can be united in cause but divided in purpose. See, cause can get you to the door, even get you inside the House of Parliament, but a unity of purpose is what will keep you there for the legacy of time. And I don't believe that it's right to be able to say to people, to ask for their trust in their vote, to turn around and say, just trust, get us in, and then once we get in, we may not be united, but at least we'll get in and change things. Now, in the history of our voting record in MMP in New Zealand, you'll know the names of the alliance, which was an alliance that happened before. We had Jim Manderton, we had Machirata with Mana Motahaki as well, and a number of them came together, social credit. They got in, but once they got in, they dispersed. They never stayed together. People would say, but it doesn't matter as long as they got in. Surely we can do better than that. Yeah. Surely we have to be better than that. And so all I'm saying is this. All I know is this. I'm going to stay the course, what I believe is important. Stand on the things that are there. Never disrespect other people in what they're saying. Because at the moment, I tell you this now, politics is getting ugly. You may have seen that in the New Zealand Herald, the NZCTU, the New Zealand Council of Trade Union, sponsored an ad which talked about Chris Luxon. And then all of a sudden, actually, if you look closer, they've photoshopped that his face looks like Robert Muldoon. Why are we getting to that? Here's what's happening now. This is where politics gets ugly. But I go one step further. Having been in the political arena, you have to be robust. Pretty conversations are not what you need. You need honest conversations. And sometimes you need to say to some of those small minor parties, the truth is, your day is done, your season has come to an end, your brand has been burnt. And as hard as people say, how can you say that? Well, you just need to look at what your reality is. Because you're entering into a place where you can't just be nice. You have to be truthful, but also respectful. Because that's the reality of what you're heading into. Because I can tell you this now, the public will rip you apart. They already are. As soon as you step up, they'll look at you, judge you, condemn you for everything else. Now that's a certain part of the public, and especially the media, that they create. But you know, most New Zealanders and Kiwis, actually they don't want to buy into that. But that's what's happening at the moment. So I, like you, would wish to have unity. I've had conversations, but at the end of the day, they choose to actually still pursue the course in which they're heading on, but we should always still respect one another as well. You guys are all very quiet, by the way.
I just want to know more about the healthcare system because it's very broken down at the moment. So I want to know the changes that would take place.
Sorry.
Healthcare,
Yep.
nurses and doctors and all that.
Yeah.
The
So.
changes that would be made.
Yeah. So one of the things that inside our booklet here you'll see, and sorry we didn't have it on the slides because we're having to readjust the slides to there, but we do talk about healthcare. That's really important. So we've talked about practitioners and people who are inside the health system. So the first thing, and I'll tell you this interesting one. So there's someone that's currently inside the health system who said to me, here's the advice that he believed that's important. And it's a strange word. He said the word honour. At the moment, there's a character of honour that's not inside our health system. And I said, explain to me that. Now, he's a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer that's in there. He said, Alfred, we're not honouring our healthcare workers, our doctors and our nurses. At the moment, the pressure that they are on. Here's the other thing that's happened, right? Under the current government and where they've led us to, I'll say it up front, it's a socialist agenda, ideology. And so here's what a socialist agenda and ideology works on. It works on a principle of power and control. And the way it works out from a governmental point of view, it's called centralisation. So we took 20 DHBs, district health boards around the country, and we decided to make them all into one. Because why? Because they said bigger is better with two parts. That's what they did. And here's the crazy thing. They did it in a time during a pandemic when people were suffering. They had people who are healthcare workers who were mandated, doctors and nurses who could have been able to be part of the system who are now not able to. So here's the view that we have. Let's go back to making sure it's localised. Let's go back to making sure that the system is honouring to the people that are there. And I can tell you, the way the system is at the moment, it's broken. This is the words that they are telling us. I've got a good friend, and I'll tell you this quick story about this. He's in Auckland, lives in Botany. He gets cut and he gets septicemia, so he gets blood poisoning, right? He was out working inside the garden. Anyway, overnight he starts to swell. The poisoning is getting into his blood system. His wife takes him to the A&E. From the A&E, they take him to the hospital. He's in the A&E ward over there. No doctor has seen him for 3 hours, and he's literally sweating and he's coughing and he's really unwell. His wife then argues with the charge nurse and said, "You have to do something for my husband." She said, "Look, I'm sorry. The best thing you can do is to take him back out to the clinic, then get readmitted on another ambulance to come back in, and they'll see him." So she does. She takes him back out to the clinic. They then put him on an ambulance. It goes back in again. And then he goes back into the A&E. An hour later, finally a doctor comes, and they said, "Oh my gosh, we need to get you up to the operating theatre." Take him to the theatre. Post-operation, the doctor comes around to him and says, "You're really lucky. You could have died." Well, he hits the roof, as you can imagine anyone. And here's what he does. He gets on the phone, he rings the CEO of Te Whatu Ora and speaks to her because he was an ex-Minister of Health. He turned around and he said, "I do not believe what I've just witnessed," and said this, "Someone is going to die." They apologised and so forth. A week later, up in Auckland, in South Auckland, a woman died on the same conditions. And this is like nothing new. Now, I'm not saying this for us to be afraid of it. We should be concerned. And we should be concerned because what we've lived under in the last 3 years is this thing called centralisation, right, to the health system. Now we're no longer being able to honour the people that are in there. Bigger is not better for us. We're not providing localised approach. Up in West Auckland, where I come from, we've got Waitakere Hospital. We are a cottage hospital servicing a metropolitan area. In other words, it's like a small hospital, and yet we've got an area that services about nearly 350,000 people. We can't, the hospital can't, cope with this. Neither can the staff. Just really bad decisions that have been made, poor decisions that have been made. Isn't it amazing during COVID? Hello, we found money. In political terms, the Reserve Bank did a thing called quantitative easing, which in simple terms, what it means is this: you print money, right, to generate it into the economy, to generate this revenue and so forth, keep inflation down and so forth. But here's what happened. All we did was actually gain more debt. But don't you think you want to put it into the places where hospitals are saying, actually, we needed to actually have better health services? Oh, no, we don't. We waste money on all sorts of other things as well. So here's our belief. And the other thing too, because I used to be on the Auckland District Health Board, so I understand the health system around a governance perspective, and primary care is always most important. Why we're not getting the care into our communities so that it's easily accessible? Why are we also looking at our GPs, and we've got specialists not looking at what the GPs are providing? You know that at the moment we do not have enough trainee doctors that are coming through our training institutions. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to get stuck with a big problem. We're not going to have the workforce that we need. We've got nurses that are now already going over to Australia, and you know why? They get better pay, better conditions, and they can live a better life. that's not going to help us. You know the thing that if you don't ask me questions, I'm going to ask you guys questions, and you do not want me to ask you questions, right? So surely you've got a question that you want to ask. Yes?
Can you explain about the votes, the wasted votes that people talk about?
Explain a bit more about the votes, because there was something that I was wondering about, and then I found out that the rest of the votes are distributed to the parties that get in.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, and reading this in here that you've written here, it was very interesting. It sort of clarified it for me how my vote can count.
Yeah.
Because I was preparing to maybe put my vote to the lesser, the two evils. And I think a lot of people may have that mindset because it's like, Harry said, tweedledee, tweedledum, I say. And so, but I really feel quite encouraged by finding you, and I think because New Zealand, we're in a different place at the moment, and I think a lot of people have lost hope, like you say.
Yeah.
And why not something different happen? Why not something great happen?
Yeah.
Come up from the ground. And I know myself personally that I felt the Lord showed me the groundswell. So I'm encouraged to stand for that.
Yeah.
And let my vote count.
That's great. So it's a very good question. And so we get asked this question. So we started to frame it up as the elephant in the room. And here's what people say: you're too small as a minority party and you're too late. So I'll answer the too small first at the moment. And people said, don't waste your vote on a minority small party. But you see, MMP was made for big and small. The last 3 years, what we've had is the old system that we voted out in 1994. We had a referendum in the country. We said, we don't want to go back to that old system. Because all we did is had one party rule from the left, another party rule from the right. It was just like a pendulum, and people said, we need to stop it. Let's do something better. What we adopted is a system that came out of Germany called MMP, Mixed Member Proportionality. And so what it was made for the big and the small. So smaller parties could hold the bigger parties to account. And you have what they call coalitions. So you see, this is now what people are looking for. But here's the thing. They look across at this party and they said, no, they're evil. Look at this party. We used to like them, but they've sort of now become evil. And then we're saying, let's just choose the lesser of two evils. And what that means is that we're voting out of fear. And I can tell you this now, the people who talk about the wasted vote are often the big parties because they want your vote. But if we do that, here's what we're going to have. We're going to have what we had the last time. Another 3 years of the domination of one major party. You need a coalition party, and a minority party does that. You would have seen that with New Zealand First. You know what they became? It's the words they called the kingmaker. You can hold them to account. You can make sure there's a balanced view that when you make decisions under what they call a coalition supply and confidence, you can actually give that to them and say, in order for us to be able to have that supply and confidence, you need to ensure that we uphold to these principles and these bottom lines. So that's what it has as well. And so inside of that, so in the size, so it's 150,000 votes is what you get, which is about 5%. That's all it is. It's the size of Tauranga as a population. And when you look at that, you think like, okay, 150,000. People say, it's too hard. And I remember that actually, it was Sergeant that rang me and he said to me, Alfred, that's a big number. Give me something smaller. So we divided 150,000 by 72 because there are 72 electorates in the country, 65 general, 7 Māori seats. And when you break that down by 72, it becomes 2,083. You're thinking like, wow, that's apparently how you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So now it's achievable. Now it's not so hard. And now what we're saying is that don't vote for the lesser of two evils because that's voting out of fear. How about we start voting out of hope? How we start voting for the fact of the things that we want that will make the difference. That's what we believe is really important as well. Because you're right, There was a time where we trusted, because there was a House of Representatives, that the smaller parties or the parties that were there, that MPs would represent our views and our values. That's changed now. Big parties now will represent their own often ideologies. And can I say this to you? If we have a swing of vote to National and ACT, you're not going to have conservative values in there that we used to have.
That's right.
I had Barry Soper interview me and he said to me, Alfred, why have you moved away from National? I said, I didn't. They moved away from me. I still upheld my conservative values, like a lot of people that are there. And if they do their history, they'll realise the fact is that the National Party had a conservative base. But the challenge with the Conservatives is that we don't often speak up and we don't activate ourselves. But we now need to have a campaign of courage. We now need people to actually then activate their voice as Conservatives and say, actually, this matters. When you vote for NewZeal, here's what you're telling to the public and to the other political parties. You're voting for a set of values that you believe are really important. And at the moment, you don't have them. I've heard people turn around and say, I'm voting for ACT because they're a Conservative party. No, they're not. They're far from being a Conservative party. And you think about euthanasia that was put through. That's not conservatism. That opened the portal of death into our country. And do you know why? Because the full legislation of the bill is this: death with dignity and assisted suicide. So we've now allowed a certain type of suicide to be in law in our nation. We've now turned people to say that, you know, if you feel lonely and you're a burden, and if you feel that you're terminal for 6 months, you know what? It's okay. You can end your life. Palliative care specialists were telling us this. By the way, 36,000 submissions, the largest of any legislation at any one time. And here's what happened. Here's what they said. 93% of those who put a submission opposed the legislation around euthanasia. And here's what the medical practitioner said. It's because it's unsafe. So you've got a bill now before Parliament that means that from the cooling off period, which means that person can change their mind, it's only 48 hours in New Zealand. If you go to Victoria in Australia, it's like 14 days. You go to Ontario, it's like 48 days. The cooling off period is a time when you make a decision to actually, I want to be euthanized, to when you may change your mind. 48 hours, you don't have time to change your mind. But that's the bill that's been put in under David Seymour, who said this is death with dignity. No, it's not. It's not death with dignity. It's removing all the dignity. And here's the thing that's going to be imposed the most. The people who at least have the opportunity to speak up and speak out against it won't be able to be heard. I put in a bill, or an SOP, called a supplementary order paper against his bill, one of many. You know what that order paper was? It was this, that under the current health acts and legislation that we have a thing called cultural competency. And what that means is simply this, that if you've got people who speak a different language, come from a different culture, then you have to provide interpreters. You have to have the ability, because those people need to know fully and be conscious of the decisions that they're making. Do you know what he did? He voted that bill down, that piece down. He said it doesn't care, it doesn't matter. So you could have someone who does not speak English be misinterpreted and then all of a sudden be euthanized in 48 hours. So can I tell you, you tell your friends, you tell your people, if anyone's going to vote for David Seymour and the ACT Party because he's a Conservative, he's not a Conservative. He's far from it. So let's talk about the National Party. Since you're now warming me up to it, let's go. Let's go to town on that. Right? I didn't move away from them. They moved from their conservative values, and I can tell you this now, they do not have the same conservative values that they used to. And if we as a nation vote for National and ACT, I tell you what, fiscally, we'll say that, man, isn't it amazing? Finally, we've got the books in control, we're making better decisions. And everyone will look at the dollars, at the finances and the economy, but behind them, here's what's going to happen. The same thing that happened before under a Labour government. Why? They'll still have the same ideologies. Why? Because they're about as liberal as Labour was, or Labour is, and ACT is. So it's not going to change. So if you want something different, if you want to vote out of hope, party vote NewZeal. Let's deal with the time thing, because people say there's not enough time. You know, in politics, here's what they say, that One day is a long time in politics. I can tell you it's so true. They say that you start the day as a rooster, crowing on the fence post, telling about how good your policies and your practices and what you're going to do for everyone, and then you end the day as a feather duster, right? You're part of the rubbish, and then you're out. It happens. 2017, Matiria Ture stood up on crowing as a rooster, telling about the Greens Party's social policy, telling how amazing it was, the support they were going to give to young mums, because she herself was a young single mother. And then she had to lie to the system in order to get the money. Oops, sorry, did you say lie? Even her own party started to challenge her about what she just said. And she said that that's okay, because that's what happens. But hang on, you're now a member of parliament. You're now in there telling the people that it's okay to lie, even when you did. Do you know what happened? Rooster, feather duster. Just like that. Just happened just like that. And there are many, many examples that I can give you where all of a sudden it transitioned and changed. 2 days ago, Chris Hipkins was interviewed by the press conference, and he was asked about mandates, right? About mandates and vaccination. So this is the Prime Minister who was the minister in charge of COVID-19. This is the minister that was in charge of getting up with the 1 o'clocks along with the Prime Minister, telling everybody what they needed to do. 1 minute, no mandate. Next minute, it is mandate. 1 minute, there's 2 classes of citizens, who 2 days ago was interviewed and said, no, was it a mandate? People chose to be vaccinated. You know what's happened? It's gone viral. You know what's going to happen? His polls are going to go down like this. Boom, boom, boom. And you know what's going to happen? There's going to be a whole lot of people looking for a home to put their votes. Party vote New Zealand. Huh? Things will change. The last thing I say about timing, people ask me this question. They've had the campaign runway for over nearly 12 months. They've been out there doing what they're doing. Do you know that in the polls we still have around about 20 to 25% of voters who still don't know who to vote for? 20 to 25%. When people are asking them about the reasons why, they say we don't know who to trust. So here we are, 40 days out, we've still got people who don't know who to trust. And here's another thing, is that there's on average 600 to 700,000 people who don't vote. That's a big pool of people. We only need 150,000 people. You only need over here 2,083 and then some. Now we're changing history.
Can you tell me how many people you had with your party? So because when the Greens got voted in unexpectedly, they had a big number and they sort of had to scramble for some people. If we somehow miraculously get 20% of the votes, you got the people?
So we currently have 6 candidates. With me, that makes 7. And then we've got 3 others at the moment that are going through a process. So we want to get to 10 that are actual candidates, and then we want to have a party list of another 10 that's there as well. So the great thing about a party list is that if the numbers go higher, then actually those who are on the party list can come in. The example I gave was also which is another thing about time. Do you remember when 2002, when Peter Dunn, he was a one-person party at United Future? And then they had this thing where they had the debate around the womb, which is about people's opinion. And then he went from a one-man party at the end of less than 2 months to a 10-person party. So he took 10 people in. And by the way, Paul Adams, who's one of our candidates, was one of those guys. Never thought that he was going in, but because he was on the party list, he got in. Yeah.
I just want to ask about how you were speaking. I just was reading here the partnership between home and school is crucial. What I want to ask is, how does that work with working parents? How they want to, blend it all together? Does that make sense? Am I making sense to you?
Yeah. Keep talking a bit more how you would describe that.
There was something when you were up there talking about how the teachers, you want to work, home and parents, because I believe that parents are standing up. They are not standing up, but they know they're not agreeing with what's happening. Whether they're speaking up, I don't know, but if my moko was something like that, you know, how the transgender stuff and the 12-year-old, you know, I would be speaking to my daughter and, you know, that we shouldn't be letting, you know, he's still a child for me, he's still only 12. But what I'm asking is, what about the working parents? How is that going to work together, what you're saying here in your puka? How does that work with the working parents and the teachers, the school and home?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I was on Board of Trustees for about 15 years with all our kids.
Yeah.
And it was one of the challenges that we had to make sure that people felt, parents felt engaged. Many of the parents were working. And so, to me, that's where, you know, schools can work in with their parents to find the right time so that parents still feel engaged. That parents still should have an opportunity to be able to speak in, to see some of the things that are happening. You know, Board of Trustees was set up so that they could represent the parents. So we need to empower them to actually then have opportunities to meet with parents, talk with parents. You know, even though people can be busy, we should still not excuse it as a way of not asking or engaging. We have to keep engaging. And I know that in our community where we were with our children, it was a Decile 1A area. Parents were busy and so forth. But, you know, we worked incredibly hard to make sure that we could accommodate for those challenges while still making sure that parents were involved. We refocused on the fact is that education is about community. That's what it's meant to be about. And as we started doing that, we found that more parents were engaged, were a part of the things that we were doing. We were part of a program called Manaia Kalani. So out of a Decile 1A school, we started realising that good education comes from a pedagogy of learning where it involves the best that comes out of kids. And here's what we learned. We learn best when we learn together. And so schooling improvement meant that parents were being helped out as well. And so we had a thing about learning in school and out of school. We had a majority of state houses in our area and people said, oh, well, how do we get that? So we worked with providers to make sure that there was internet connectivity in all of the homes, even in state houses. So I believe that we can find innovative solutions. We do not have to then think that, oh, just because they go without, you can find other ways. We had providers that were able to provide that. And with Housing New Zealand, every Housing New Zealand house that was inside that area, 2,500 of them, had access to internet so they could make sure their kids could learn in school and out of school. And so parents could be involved. We then started to say to parents, well, how about we teach you to be technicians? They said, who, us? Technicians? I said, yeah. So you could understand how the system worked. So I believe the fact is that we can find ways, and that if we look at education as about a community of learning, then we can shift the way that it's not just about sending our kids to school and then them relying on the teachers to do what they do and then bringing them back home again. Actually, we can all learn and we can all grow together.
No, thank you. And just one more thing I want to say is I've been asking God, who am I to vote for? I haven't been getting no answer until tonight we went to prayers and we were encouraged to come here and hear you. And and I just wanted to share that with you and just thank you, because as I was coming, I was going, well, Lord, is this the one? I want to be hearing what you're saying. So I just wanted to I suppose I just want to encourage you to say that, yes, you are speaking what I wanted to hear. That you're not speaking, it's not you speaking, it's God speaking. So kia ora.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us a little bit about co-governance?
Hallelujah. Someone asked a question. When I was in Southland, when I was in the South Island, they asked me that question at every meeting. This is the first time I've been asked that question out here on the East Coast. So here's my response, is that co-governance is nothing new. It's been happening for a while. There are good examples and bad examples of where it's worked. And so what is new is that we've had a government that's tried to make it a one-size-fits-all for everything. That's what's new. And it's backed onto the fact of the Three Waters whole legislation and push, where it's taking away the sovereignty of local elections and local bodies to determine actually what their affairs should be like. So the example of this co-governance where it's been forced, so Tanya Tapsell, who is currently the Mayor of Rotorua, turned around and said to the government, do not force it upon us, because it'll make our situation worse. And it did. Why? Because they try to force co-governance. Where the biggest challenge that comes is that when we talk about elected and unelected people in positions, Three Waters was a classic example of that. And so to me, I don't believe that actually we should be forcing it, but what we should look at is that where it has worked well in certain situations, then we should consider it. But it should be something that happens on a localised level, not being forced on everybody in every community. But there's another question that has to go into this. And what I get concerned about, there are people that are going around the country who are using this terminology. Co-governance is about Māori elitism. Now you're beginning to divide a community and even a country. Because then people are turning around and saying, here's what it is. They're talking about the Treaty of Waitangi. They want to be able to reframe it, redecide it about what it is. Now all we're doing is now basically putting us against each other. I don't agree with that. And I think that if we're going to have courageous leadership, then let's talk about those issues and have an open and safe forum where people can ask the question. I've seen it many times. Now we've got political leaders there on the campaign trail, and here's what they say. Oh, get rid of all the Māori names because that'll make it better. Then everyone applauds and says, that's right. No, that's not right. You've just tried to make people happy, but you haven't solved the big issue. The big issue is at the moment, how can you have a respectful bicultural relationship between Māori and Pākehā, between Māori and the Crown, between Māori and communities? No one wants to talk about that. When I was in Parliament, I began to challenge the status and the conversations that we're having. Everyone wants to just flip it out. They don't want to talk about this. They want to have the courageous conversation. They said there's a Māori caucus, Pacific caucus, and mainstream. They keep dividing us. That's not uniting us. But if we're going to have a conversation about what's important and how we can restore and actually grow together and thrive together, then let's be willing to have a safe space where people can say, actually, I don't understand what Te Tiriti or Waitangi actually means from a Māori worldview, from a Pākehā worldview, from what that's there. That's a courageous conversation. That's what will unite us, not all the other stuff that's out there. And you know, what I hear is leadership that wants to just try and appease people, make people feel happy. They turn around and say, get rid of all this Maori stuff, they say. Wow, that's really great for good leadership. No, it's not. That's not courageous leadership. And so co-governance, Three Waters, I believe, was a wrong approach that was set by the current government of the day. That's not taking people together. That's just being bullies to decide again. Remember, socialism is about power and control, centralisation. Just make us one big melting pot. You remember that song? What we need is a great big melting pot, right? You know, you get all the chocolate covers that come together. That's not unity, because unity is actually being able to celebrate diversity. And then I've heard people say to me, but Alfred, we're in a multicultural country now. We're going to celebrate all the different cultures. Here's my reply to them this. But if you haven't sorted out your relationship in a bicultural relationship, I tell you what, you're never going to be good in a multicultural relationship. You know? Because here's what will happen. When it got really tough here, they turned around and they bailed out. That's what Dame Whina Cooper said. Don't leave the room. Stay in the room. And then they say this, but let's just all be multicultural. And you know what will happen? We'll all be happy families until one day, one of those multiculturals said, actually, we don't like this. And all of a sudden, they'll have the DNA of remembering what happened there. They'll come back here, and then they'll go to another culture, and then another culture. While everything seems happy, but we've not become better. We've not become stronger. You know, there's so much that we can celebrate as a country. And when I used to go up to Waitangi, he was my little bubble as a politician. They'd fly us into Kerekere, then we go off and then we go to the service that was there on Te Tihi Marae. And I tell you what, being a national Polynesian MP, man, that was an occupational hazard. And I'd be going along there, and we'd be going in there with all the protesters going along. But then my saving grace is me and the other Samoan and Māori MP were walking along at the back, and then they all said, oh, no, that's the security guards. Don't worry about them. Wow. Geez, not even our own people could think that we were good enough to get into Parliament. You know? And then we went from there. Here's what we do. We go into another meeting, go and have a cup of teas and cucumber sandwiches. And then, you know what we do? Then we go to the dawn service, hear the dawn service, hearing prayers that you think like, we don't know, praying to whales and elephants and all sorts of other things, right? And then we come back on a plane and we're out. We're none the wiser. We're none the better. And here's what happened when I was there and I began to go out. I began to pray a prayer. The Lord said, where is the heart of this nation? I go up to a place called Rangihawa, just outside of Kirikiri, where I see there's a place called Marsden's Cross, where in 1814 Samuel Marsden came in. But then I see, the kaumātua, Te Hurihanga Rihare, turn around and tell the story about Ngāti Hine, that 400 years before, they prayed, had a visitation, and they called that beachfront called Ohibe, which means to shout to the risen one. And then they look at the mountain of the Maunga over there, they call it Mataka. Mata being eyes, ka means fire, which means the fact is that they had a visitation of God who had the eyes of compassion, and then they named the walkway called Rangihawa, which means gateway to heaven. And then all of a sudden you're starting to hear the stories. We go from there to a place called Pakaraka. And over there you see the headstones of Henry and Charlotte Williams. And in the chapel you begin to hear his story about the journal that I told you about. And that the heart of this man was this, that he was an Anglican minister that came in then, and here's what happened. When he complained to the governor of the day that they were breaching the confidence of the covenant that they had made with Māori, you know what they did? They sacked him. And he went from over there in Paihia all the way to a little place called Pakaraka, and he stayed there. Why? Because he wanted to uphold the word that he has. And here's what happened. Paramount chiefs like Kawati would come and talk to him. And here's Kawati, one of the first signatures to the gospel, to the Treaty of Waitangi, then all of a sudden sees the breach. Now he's taken up arms and he's fighting. And he goes to a place called Ruapekapeka, which was where they discovered trench warfare, by the way. And then here they were, a smaller band of about 140, fighting almost 1,000 soldiers. They escape and they go away. He has a moment like Jacob and Esau, wrestled with God, and in the morning he said, I realize this Hebrew God is greater than me. So he dug a hole, put his weapons of warfare, and said this, I will no longer be a warrior of war. Instead, I'm going to be a prince of peace. Now that's courage. And he talked about Henry Williams as a peacemaker. We had the courage to go into confrontation between tribal wars, and he brought peace into that midst. That's a courageous conversation. That's a history we don't talk about, we don't tell about. You know why? Because it's a footprint of faith. That's the reasons why. Now that story needs to be here in our nation, in our stories that are being told. Because by the way, if you haven't realized, our curriculum is already being written for the history of our nation, and it does not have those stories. Because if you see the story of unity, here's what Kawati did. Now with faith in his heart, he releases a man called Piripi Taumatua, who goes back to a place called Tairāwhiti up in the coast, as you know, around Gisborne, and he comes back to his whānau and his family, and they said, oh, you're alive. What happened? He tells them the story of the gospel, sings a hymn, says a prayer, and then what we are told is that nearly 70% of Māori on the Ngāti Porou come to the Lord. And so Aparana Ngāta, who was in Parliament, he makes this speech inside Parliament. If it was not for this Hebrew God, then the flesh of my enemy would still be between my teeth. Now you're talking about courage that changes a community, changes a country. That's the stories we need to hear. That's what we need to hear. And when you vote for NewZeal, that's what we are doing. We're taking that courage back into that place. Because no one's talking about it. No one wants to talk about that. But here's what I know. The Spirit of God wants to put things right. Because this is His nation. Put things back into order. Rebuild the city walls.